Today, I want to revisit the lies and hypocrisy that have infiltrated the All-At-RA movement, but this time with more seriousness and from a slightly different perspective. I also want to discuss the consequences of this substitution, both for the movement's participants and for all of humanity. Afterwards, my consciousness will propose a strategy in which, having only one pawn on the chessboard, you can win the entire game and convey the danger of climate threats to humanity. Friend, first and foremost, I want to say that you and I have at least one common goal: saving the world from the climate Cerberus. After all, I'm just a person, and I have loved ones, and I also want them to survive. Yes, perhaps you, like me, also strive for spiritual salvation, or perhaps not, but your decision on this matter doesn't hinder our good communication. I understand that some people's from the very first words of this video presents me as an enemy because I pointed out things they disagree with. But I know exactly where the truth lies, and my consciousness, for its part, provides irrefutable evidence of this knowledge in this three-dimensional world. How can I simply sit and remain silent? I see that people have had a clear corridor of beliefs formed for them, and to the detriment of logic and common sense, even feeling on a deep level that things shouldn't be this way, they can't escape it. These beliefs not only lead people away from the real enemy that lives within each of us, but they also prevent them from effectively resisting the external enemy, the climate, wasting energy fighting the authorities, priests, and simply people with different views, while valuable time slips away irrevocably. But you know what? Even if you disagree with my words, doubt what you feel, and aren't strong in logic and analysis, you can still find the truth after listening to this video. And all you need for this is one quality: honesty with yourself. Let's start by recalling what Igor Mikhailovich always said from one broadcast to the next. He said that the main task of each person during their earthly life is to attain spiritual salvation, and the main task of humanity is to build a creative society, because this is the commandment of our prophets, this is the will of God, and only in it can we overcome the climate and survive these times. And in the latest broadcasts, he also pointed out that even if the All-At-RA scientists manage to independently create a development capable of coping with cosmic radiation, applying it to save a consumer society with all its dirt and vices would be like going against the will of God. And that this time at the end of the cycle is given to humanity precisely for building a proper society and purification. Did Igor Mikhailovich ever say anywhere that in order to save humanity, we must renounce God, hide spiritual knowledge, bury the idea of a creative society, and kneeling before Satan, beg for the salvation of our physical bodies, and at the same time, convince others to stand beside us? I understand that there are scientists who have joined All-At-RA, and there are just people concerned about the climate, who initially didn't accept spiritual knowledge, setting purely earthly goals for themselves. That's their choice, and as they say, no questions asked. But if a person has already came into contact with knowledge, felt its truth, and started practicing, how can they now say that this knowledge never existed at all, or that it's not important and is just religion? And we see how participants in the movement, including some who sat at the same table with Igor Mikhailovich, now fear to pronounce the word God in their videos, and don't even mention the creative society. For some reason, many people think that being close to Igor Mikhailovich is great luck, forgetting what a huge responsibility it is. After all, such people become authorities for many, and it is they who receive the system's closest attention, and the system is ready to expend the maximum amount of effort on them. Because, if they stumble, they involuntarily drag those who follow behind them. And to stay on the spiritual path, such people need exceptional honesty with themselves, selflessness, and devotion to God. Friends, think about it: is the fear from the knowledge that you will continue to consider sectarians or any other of his tricks more significant than God, more important than true spiritual knowledge? Has the consciousness's programming won, that abandoning this will open doors to the right places, and the climate problem will finally be heard? They won't be heard, and I'll explain why later. And then participants, led by the confused, write comments to me with meanings twisted inside out. For example, our friend said, "What divides people is the devil, and what unites them is pleasing to God," meaning that I am, supposedly, dividing people from the current All-At-RA with my videos. So, if I now gather a gang and we go around robbing the weak, that would be pleasing to God, because we're united by the desire for easy money. Do I understand our friend's words correctly? Or do we realize that Igor Mikhailovich was saying that people are united by God's love, and separated by the consciousness? So, do you agree? So let's see, on what basis are people now being united in all-at-RA? Based on two things, fear for their bodies and the fight against anti-cultists or other pawns. Right? Now, honestly answer yourself, yes or no. Yes, and this, no matter how you look at it, is earthly affairs that come from the system. But uniting people on the basis of spiritual knowledge, on love for God and each other, was precisely a God-pleasing act, what truly united people in spirit, and this is exactly what has been excluded from the movement. It's amazing that such commenters support the lies of the five in the video, but accuse me of serving Satan. And also, when they sincerely undertake to defend something, for example, freedom and democracy, they start first and foremost with themselves, with the movement itself. But what do we see? Under the videos of those five, you can't write a single word against their position. And what kind of democracy is it if the current self-proclaimed authority in all-at-RA makes decisions and issues orders without explanations or agreement with the other participants? And answer, no, not even to me but to yourself. How did it happen that the movement's participants have reached such blatant hypocrisy? Now, I want to talk in a little more detail about the person whose arrival marked a change in the movement's vector, Egon Cholakyan.
I forwarded the videos of his appeals into text and conducted a small investigation, since I don't want to, even indirectly, violate the laws of my country. I will transfer these records to the author of the already mentioned channel, Keys to Paradise. The author is not from the Russian Federation, so, in order to verify everything yourself, take the records from her. So, at the end of 2023, while Igor Mikhailovich was still around, Cholakyan made two appeals to the scientific community and to three presidents, Biden, Xi Jinping, and Putin. In the first, he explained that he was concerned about the climate and spoke about the shifting of the Earth's core, the decrease in the ocean's thermal conductivity, the 12,000-year cycle, about how in November 2022 he heard a fateful report on climate change and, after verifying this data, agreed with it. Then he praised the Alit-Ra scientists and called for the creation of a unified scientific center. Respectful rhetoric. I quote, "I publicly and openly appeal to you, to three outstanding leaders of our time, because your voice is crucial. I rely on you three, gentlemen, as leaders endowed with unique political wisdom, strategic thinking, foresight, and rich management experience in resolving this extremely urgent issue. At this fateful moment for our entire civilization, your political expression of will is an instrument for the survival of all humanity. Today we all have a common enemy that threatens all countries, the climate. Therefore, it is necessary to consolidate all our resources. I ask you to hear me, reach out to each other, and immediately sit down at the same table. Only in your status as world leaders is it possible to launch this mechanism of change. We need you to be sitting at the same table. As long as we are disunited, we are completely powerless against the cataclysms that are about to falling down on us. In light of this critical situation, it is now urgently necessary to globally transform world politics and direct all efforts toward consolidation. All the world's armies must change their mode of operation and move from destroying enemies to saving people. We, people, are not enemies to each other. The formation of an international agenda that we are not all enemies depends solely on the three of you. There is no longer any point in fighting and dividing. The only point is to seek ways to unite. People need to feel like people. They need to feel that their lives are valuable, important, and protected. National borders should already be open for free movement for everyone. I urge you to hold an official meeting of world leaders dedicated to reorganizing the global economy, containing your armed forces, and redirecting existing military equipment and resources to saving human lives. It is now vitally important to change international rhetoric and update the agenda of uniting people. We must restore common sense, adequacy, and respect between people. It's time to overcome all rivalries and differences, to fight for a unified future, for a single Earth, for the survival of each and every one. The time has come for responsible leaders to make wise decisions. You have to agree, at that time, Cholakyan was saying very important and necessary words, and it was logical and right for the movement to support such a scientist. Back then, it seemed to everyone that, finally, someone serious with significant authority had heard and come to help. So, let's remember what Igor Mikhailovich said about him at that time. I quote, "He comes out with appeals and says practically the same things we say. On the one hand, that's cool, but we need to understand that this is not a creative society. What he proposed, if it is implemented, it may be the forerunner of the creative society, if we look the truth in the eye. Why, if countries really unite, open borders, and politicians finally start caring about people." Igor Mikhailovich also said that Cholakyan is a complex person, a serious scientist, that he is the axis on which other, scientists depend. That his theory absolutely correlates with the Alit-Ra scientists' theory on degassing, and in that context, he can save both Siberia and America. But tell me, did I ever say anywhere that Cholakyan is, from his house, that he is working on himself, that he can be fully trusted and listened to in everything? He didn't say that, right? Because Cholakyan, despite his numerous regalia, was and remains a person under the control of consciousness, and therefore completely controlled by the system. And then, in November 2023, Igor Mikhailovich disappears from the information field, and what do we see? Cholakyan's rhetoric changes dramatically, so much so that it seems like someone else wrote the text. It's surprising, because in fact, not a single president responded to his appeal, yet he personally unleashes all the dogs on Putin. Even the title was impressive. Putin's fatal mistake. Russia is doomed. American scientist reveals facts about the collapse of Russia. Of course, I'm not sure if it was like that originally, because even this I found with difficulty. I will read out individual fragments. Mr. Putin, after you kicked out those who defended your country, what respect can there be? It is time to stop profiting and building your political career on the climate problem when the existence of everyone is at stake. The price of Russia's future is a fake medal on the chest of a fake official who was appointed to this position by you. If you have kept your sanity and a sound mind, do not participate in the upcoming elections. And in their last throes, not only every citizen of your country, but all the people of this world, as long as they have breath, will curse you. Believe me, people all over the world will know who is really to blame for the death of humanity. And when they die, their curses will be directed at you. Leave now, and people will retain respect for you. Leave now, and people will forget what you have done, because they will soon have more pressing problems. Leave now, and you will preserve the memory of yourself as a great man. This is your only chance to save face and dignity. However, I understand perfectly well that you will not take this step. Personal power is much more valuable to you than the lives of billions of people. And this comes out a month before the presidential elections in the Russian Federation, at a time when the country is at war and in crisis. Can you imagine? If Alit-Ra is outside of politics, then tell me, what should this be called? He also openly encourages people to break laws of the Russian Federation by distributing his appeal. Despite the fact that Igor Mikhailovich has repeated many times, including in relation to the ban on Alit-Ra and the creative society in the Russian Federation, that in no case should people do foolish things and violate the laws of their country. And answer honestly, if such an appeal was made to Biden, Xi Jinping, or the government of any other country, how would they react? The authorities, wherever they are, always strive to preserve themselves, and react to such attacks with, at a minimum, the detention of distributors. Therefore, the repressions against Alit-Ra volunteers are an expected step. But here's what's interesting. Cholakyan is a smart man. Couldn't he have understood this? Agree that he couldn't. Then what was he counting on, if he himself said that Putin wouldn't listen to him? What is the meaning of his appeal? What is his strategy? If he wanted to convey that the shutdown of equipment in Siberia would accelerate the climate crisis, he could have said so without unnecessary accusations, as Igor Mikhailovich said earlier, but why shift to personal attacks and insult the authorities? He is like a madman who attacks a wolf with only a twig in his hands. But the point is that this madman is located overseas in another country, and the twig is ALLATRA volunteers who are detained in the Russian Federation for breaking the law. But it gets even worse, and in April 24, a 3.5-hour video comes out, Revenge of the Grandmasters. Secret players exposed, and pay special attention to the fact that the title on the image is different, Invisible War. There are a few real facts there, around which a sea of speculation and outright lies are mixed, and I partially mentioned them when analyzing the film, Impact. But that analysis was from a position of logic and common sense, and now I want to point out a different aspect. This video is significant because it forced every participant in the movement in the last year of the crossroads to make a choice, who to follow and who to serve. Remember this fragment with a simple diagram from the program, The Two in Private. In ALLATRA, the invisible war has always referred to the war of the spiritual principle with the animal mind, i.e., one's own consciousness. And what do we see in this appeal by Cholakyan? He clearly shifts the focus from the consciousness within each person to the KGB Hydra, which he proposes to fight. And where does he lead us, according to this diagram? And there's also a moment here that clearly shows that this was exactly a fork in the road, where a choice was offered between good, means the spiritual principle and Igor Mikhailovich, and evil, the animal principle and Cholakyan. The consciousness of some will now be outraged, saying that Cholakyan's actions are a continuation of what Igor Mikhailovich was doing, that they are on the same side. But it is not so, and it's not just on the level of changing the direction from an internal enemy to an external one, but also on the level of trust. It was necessary to decide who had more trust, Igor Mikhailovich or Cholakyan. And just as in the times of the prophets, the majority did not believe Igor Mikhailovich, the messenger of God, but ordinary people, Cholakyan and those behind him. And now, as they say, watch the hands and be amazed. Remember, in Anastasia Novak's books in Sensei 3 and 4, there is talk about keepers of knowledge, or archons. This word is mentioned there 614 times, that's how important this knowledge is. Let me remind you that, according to the books, the archons have invisibly ruled the world for thousands of years, have achieved perfection in the art of managing and manipulating the consciousness of people. They created an artificial elite, placing their puppets around the world and introducing religion, while monopolizing spiritual culture. At the head of religions are their protégés, and at the head of big politics and business are their puppets. I quote, "Their goal is to distract a person's attention from his internal spiritual to the external material. To hide the true cause of evil, lurking in man himself, in his animal nature. And of course, the most important thing for them is to achieve unlimited power over people. This is what they strive for, dictating their rules of life to society, imposing wars, and not disdaining to awaken animal instincts in people. It is beneficial for them to keep people in fear and ignorance." Igor Mikhailovich also spoke about the keepers in the program, fly or elephant, I quote, "And let's look at history. Who invented this concept of separation? And who started fighting first against heresy, against religious untruth? Until today, this is all, and today especially, is such a tool that can remove the unwanted from the road. Because of the fly, we don't see the elephant that rules this world. Those architects of this world who killed billions of people and who want to reduce all our humanity to a population of more than 8 billion, well, they are comfortable with the figures of 500 million, well, a maximum of 1 billion. Because they can easily manipulate such a number, simply manage and keep them in check. But those people we are talking about, the so-called keepers, the architects of this world, they made a mistake. They made a mistake in time. They made a mistake in their dreams. For 2,000 years they have been killing truly holy people. They killed and destroyed those who strive for freedom. They closed and still close our mouths to this day, introducing and tightening laws over us, manipulating the Constitution and all our rights. They strive for absolute power, but they made a mistake. They were wrong that this world is our home and our world. Their world was destroyed 12,000 years ago. And those who take an unbiased approach to history will see from where the roots come, and what kind of organization it is, and that it really exists. In history, they acted in such a way that they always describe the heroes, those whom they put in power, and those whom they easily manipulated and controlled. As a rule, they took easily manipulated people, took those who are weak-minded but with high pride, who are easily controlled, and whose thirst for power and money is absolutely insatiable. And they stood behind them like shadows, those representatives of this organization, the keepers, or, as they were known in the world, the great architects. They created many different organizations that people later blamed for everything they actually did. They introduced symbols and signs so that we could see them. Why? Because in reality, the rumor was always about them. And everyone suspected that there was some kind of force. But they always said that it was the institution of power, it was the institution of business. And they always blamed anyone but them. But they were always there. They wrote history, showing these controlled and manipulated people as the greatest minds. All they dream about is El's return. All they dream of is to bring their immortals back to life, whom only El can bring back. Only El controlled the lives of those, because he is their God. See how everything fits into this canvas when you know the truth, and now many know it. But what does this say? Does this say that the world will change? Maybe, but this world can only change when we have enough internal fire, internal light to illuminate this world. You know, I'll give you a simple example. If there are many of us in a room, and there is absolute darkness in the room, and we light only one candle, then each of us creates a lot of shadows. And in these shadows there are those whom we call keepers or architects. But if as many candles are lit as there are of us, and we place them around us, yes, we will cast shadows, but these shadows will be transparent, and we will see everything in bright light, and you can no longer hide in those shadows. If we use our power for the good of this world, then the world will change. And our power is in our word. There is nothing stronger than the word. We cannot use our power in any expressed actions that are destructive or directed towards illegal and unnatural acts. Why? Because we will suffer, because we are human. Why do we say that each of us in this consumer format must first of all be a patriot of our country and protect the interests of our country? Any stability, even bad, is better than instability, and we know this. We have seen it in history and experienced it many times. We have experienced various revolutions, after which we, the people, lived worse. We, the people, were deprived of our natural rights after these revolutions. And every destructive event that these sectarians committed with our hands, that event deprived us of rights and freedom. And lately we see how the same keepers have become active all over the world. That's why Cerberus is in this world. They dreamed and were already one step away from absolute power and the return of El. But there will be no more El in this world. There will be no absolute power in this world. That's why Cerberus is here. And now we all of humanity, fragmented and broken into fragments by these architects. We all, like a broken mirror reflecting this truth and these shadows, we will all experience one fate. And regardless of what it is, we will do it together. But we, like broken fragments of a mirror, we reflect the light, and many of us are already able to radiate it. And this says a lot. If we understand the importance and value of our light in this world, which is our desire for a normal human life, for our unification, the unification of all humanity. If we understand that we can stand against Cerberus as a united humanity, a free humanity with a burning fire inside, then we will create such a light in which the light of Cerberus will dissolve. And he will not be terrible to us and will not be able to do anything to us. But if we remain who we are, then our fate will be the same for everyone as the events that are happening now predict for us. I'll say it simply, those whom we call keepers, they created a lot of temples in this world in the hope that they would rule our minds and rule our hearts. But their actions are now so destructive that, if we do not find freedom in ourselves, if we do not find God in ourselves and do not find the desire for life in ourselves, it is God who gives us the desire for life. The devil gives us the desire for envy, for hatred, and division. So, if we do not find God in ourselves and do not find the strength to fulfill what Jesus Christ wanted, what the best of people, the Prophet Muhammad, wanted, and if we do not unite, then neither us nor the temples will left in this world. And one more. Sometimes we don't see the simple, that's how our consciousness works. And those who manipulate it know perfectly well how our consciousness works. They know perfectly well how to put a thought in someone's mind so that the whole world changes later. They know perfectly well how to lead to power the one they want. But those who did not succumb to them, they also cleverly, playing with our consciousness, expose them as extremists, in this terrible word, which is essentially division. And those who divide us manipulate what they themselves do. And how many of these seemingly trivial things happen? This is he referring to the trial of an Alit-Ra volunteer from Russia. Trivial for whom? For the one who has raised himself to the skies, for the one who has stopped considering himself a man, has raised himself to the level of the celestials, but in fact is just a figure, an ordinary figure on the chessboard. In which the one who is in the shadows plays and whom this figure sometimes does not even know. But the one who plays him knows. Friend, note, friend, his wife's friends. It would seem, what is the connection here? You won't find the guilty one, but the bottom line is that this fly kills elephants. And that is true, and our world is full of it. But can we change? Yes, friends, we can change everything. We can build a creative society in which there will be no money, in which there will be no power, and any action against us disappears, and any action can only be aimed at improving our lives. And all of this hatred of ours towards each other and all of the divisions that were artificially and skillfully imposed on us by the architects of this world when it was built the way it is now, everything will disappear. We will have nothing to divide. And now see what Cholakyan said in his appeal. I will quote some excerpts. I will tell you about a specific structure whose activities we have uncovered. Its main mission is to destroy the established geopolitical dynamics in the world, destroy democratic systems, and put the world on the brink of nuclear conflict. These methods include not only an organized disinformation campaign but also influencing mass consciousness, distorting reality, as well as a programmed set of destructive manipulative techniques. All these methods are aimed at changing and forming narratives in political and social discourse in order to influence the perception and behavior of society in a way that benefits this structure. They operate invisibly, because everyone is sure that their structures do not exist. But this third force methodically breaks plans in resolving crises and joint agreements, places its political figures, like on a chessboard, in whose actions, at first glance, there is no logic. But logic is easy to understand if you know that an invisible third force is behind their actions. And this does not at all mean that the top officials of countries making seemingly illogical statements are recruited by agents of this structure. Our investigation revealed that the architects of consciousness are able to put the desired destructive image into the consciousness of the target object through a chain of 5 people. At the same time, the object perceives this image as its own thought or as an idea with a clearly defined goal for follow-up actions, but in fact, it begins to perform the strategic tasks necessary for this structure. This explains why even top officials of states can make illogical statements, act contrary to common sense, and sow chaos. Using techniques developed in specialized psychophysical laboratories and based on knowledge of the architecture of consciousness, the enemy masterfully forces citizens to act in accordance with preset scenarios, introducing manipulative images and ideas into their consciousness. They skillfully manipulate the information space, creating chains of influence that start with one person and spread until the desired effect is achieved. Having prepared the ground, they introduce triggers that activate the necessary images and narratives in the human consciousness. Their ultimate goal is to change the way the population thinks, replacing established beliefs with new ones that will help achieve their strategic interests. Our breakthrough was achieved by observing an international volunteer organization that has been subjected to targeted repression by instances covering the aforementioned structure. Well, yes, you'll say, he's also talking about these keepers or archons. And Igor Mikhailovich's words confirm that they are the ones behind the persecution of Allatra. But listen further. We are talking about a fundamental, completely unique autonomous structure within the KGB, which dates back to the 1920s and 1930s, namely to a special unit created under Felix Dzerzhinsky and headed by Gleb Boki. The collapse of the Soviet Union was perceived by this KGB structure as a deep personal humiliation and a strong blow to self-esteem. Their main goal is an act of revenge for their past defeat. To achieve their goal, they are ready to sacrifice both the lives of people, political figures, and their former territories. They are even willing to allow a full-scale nuclear conflict if it suits their long-term strategy. But in the book, Crossroads, this special unit of the KGB is called a secret order and is described very well, and from the most positive side. And Gleb Boki eventually became a guardian of the arcane. I'll quote a little from Crossroads. Most of them came from the military elite, but the one that rose to such rank solely thanks to its courage and heroism, the one for whom the word honor is synonymous with the absolute dignity of a man with a capital letter, a special inner state of the soul. And at the meeting, they discussed not plans for world domination, but how to increase the spirituality of humanity and save the world from the impending climatic disasters. In particular, the following creative techniques were proposed at the meeting. Propaganda of positive trends in the media. Replacing negative attitudes with code words. Success, happiness, health, luck, joy of life, prosperity, and so on. Development of a system of socio-psychological rehabilitation of the individual in the field with the training of specialist psychologists. Conveying reliable information to people and most importantly, encouraging them to take control of their internal negative thoughts, clear control over the destructive flow of information, and especially that containing elements of influence on the subconscious, as well as changing their environment for the better. You get it, right? Cholakyan, to hide the archon's blatant presence on the world stage, their impact on human consciousness, and their persecution of Allatra is diverting responsibility to the order, which, conversely, safeguards people from evil. And there's even a logical inconsistency here. The order is only 100 years old, while the unseen presence of the shadow government can be traced much earlier. But I won't bore you. If you're interested, reread the first 100 pages of Crossroads and compare them with Cholakyan's address. You'll find about 5 more equally obvious contradictions there. So, friends, hasn't the time come for us to show honesty by ourselves, by calling things by their names? You all decided a long time ago who the liars are, didn't you? Was it Anastasia Novak and Igor Mikhailovich, or Cholakyan and those who were behind him? Well, why immediately say, lied? Some people's consciousnesses will try to weasel out of it. They'll say that Anastasia Novak's books were written a long time ago, and are already outdated. But excuse me, predictions of the future can become outdated, because whether they come true or not depends on our actions. Yes, that order might no longer exist, After all, the book describes events from 3 decades past. But the events that have already happened cannot become outdated. That is, the order founded by Gleb Boki cannot be rewritten in history and become evil. Moreover, their depiction of the Guardian's work in Anastasia Novak's books, as well as the discussions with Igor Mikhailovich. So, it was a choice of whom you trust more, Igor Mikhailovich or Cholakyan. Since there simply couldn't be a third option, some Alit-Ra bloggers even say something like, "Oh, just read about Gleb Boki on the internet. It's all obvious, then." And I read about him. Yes, a negative image of that person has been created there. So, these friends of ours, under the control of their consciousnesses, are implying that Anastasia Novak lied, but they won't come out and say it. However, among other things, the internet mentions that Boki organized orgies at his country house, in which, among others, 2 of his underage daughters participated. How awful. I wonder, did he force his daughters to do this? Or were they both just such depraved young ladies? This brings to mind a dirty story about Alit-Ra online, which described that women engaging in various indecent acts together with Igor Mikhailovich. So, these bloggers' minds are displaying an incredible double standards. Anything negative about Alit-Ra is a lie, but anything negative about Boki is true. However, if you dig deeper, not just read various articles, but for example, look at Ruwiki, in the section of relationships with family and colleagues, then a completely different picture emerges for those who think, not the one they're trying to sell for us about this person. And there's another excuse, which is that Anastasia Novak's books. Well, why base anything on them? They're just fiction. We already have the conversations with Igor Mikhailovich. So, their consciousness conveniently skirt around the issue. It turns out Nastya didn't exactly lie, she just fantasized about this order. But alas, she called it good and guessed wrong. But thankfully, Cholakyan came and explained how it really was. To those who think this way, I want to say, rewatch the Flyer Elephant broadcast. There, Igor Mikhailovich directly names the Order of Guardians, which is thousands of years old, as being guilty of persecuting Alit-Ra. Also, rewatch the About Spiritual Grace broadcast, where he tells Archpriest Andrei in details without having seen him before. Do you really think that Igor Mikhailovich could been unaware of who Boki was and what the order was really doing? And I won't even mention the truly absurd cases where some participants' consciousnesses completely forbid them from thinking, and they just ask in response who I'm working for or say that yes, there's an inconsistency, but it's just an unimportant detail. For such people, the main thing is that the right emotions are invested and the enemy is identified. They are, excuse my bluntness, demonstrably short on reasoning skills and solely devoted to their own narrow-minded views. You can get these kinds of people excited about anything. The main thing for them is not having to work on themselves during the process. And 2 more uncomfortable moments for some, which I will not go into. Anti-cult organizations arose from religion itself, to eliminate competitors. And as we remember, religions are controlled by archons, not by the KGB Hydra. Quoting from The Crossroads, Nomo is just an important link in a chain of possible events that will eventually affect all of humanity. His presence on the world political stage can positively influence the resolution of a global problem that will soon cover all of humanity. This problem is the survival of civilization. Humanity is on the threshold, and the next step will depend on the prevailing choice of each individual separately. That is, Nomo is not some kind of messiah, so there is no need to shift responsibility for all the world's evil onto him. But here's what the members of the order say to him: the test of power is the hardest test for a human. Therefore, having reached this peak, always remember that this step is only your internal test of strength. And whether Homo passed this test or not, decide for yourself. So, let's take a midterm summary. We see that those who did not have enough loyalty to Igor Mikhailovich, intelligence, or deep feelings, lost their invisible war and flew straight into the impact movie, where their consciousness was further narrowed by negative images and emotions and fixed in the Cholakyan corridor of beliefs already indicated. And then, closer to the end of 2024, a new appeal by Cholakyan is released, called Crossroads, which, in essence, is about the same thing as in the Invisible War and the film. But pay attention to the intro screen. Remember, in one of the conversations Igor Mikhailovich said something like this: "Go right, you'll die. Go left, you'll die. Go straight, you'll live in the creative society?" And tell me, in even one of his appeals, has Cholakyan mentioned the creative society? No. So, where is he suggesting we go? Right? Or left? And what do you think? Did the archons personally come up with such names and images? Or is it the consciousness of the participants themselves is making fun of us all, showing who and where the majority of Alat Ra members went? Even having knowledge from the book of the same name and conversations with Igor Mikhailovich? And this, mind you, was happening in the last year of humanity's choice of path. And this cart rolled where it was directed, and along the way its route was cleverly adjusted. And now it is not the KGB Hydra that is to blame for all the world's troubles, but specifically Putin and the authorities in Russia. Remember, in the last video, I laughed at the idea that the collapse of the project to build cities in Siberia was due to a plume, because it's obvious that in a war, there's simply no money for that. And if the state shut down the project, then, naturally, private investors will not invest in this region either. But one attentive viewer, for which I thank him very much, pointed out my mistake. After all, I did not mention the evacuation of the Siberian plant, which, in his opinion, is more difficult to explain. I will quote an excerpt from Cholakyan's address on this matter. It is called "Disinformation in Your Life." But perhaps the most telling signal is the flight of business from Siberia. Take, for example, Norilsk nickel. As I mentioned earlier, back in April 2024, the management of Nornickel announced its intention to close its copper plant in Norilsk, located in Siberia, and transfer copper production to China, and in November confirmed the choice of location for the new plant. All of this is presented as a new stage in the company's development. And this is important to note now. This move continues to puzzle Russian experts, while he does not name names, because it looks not only economically questionable, but also strategically disadvantageous. And here is immediately a logical inconsistency, because practically all the in Norilsk, so what is the point of investing money in building a factory from scratch in China if there is nothing to process on it? And then, how do you imagine it? Important people came to Potanin, the owner of this factory by the way, a very intelligent person close to the authorities, and secretly told him that Siberia was about to blow up. And he's like, really? Well, okay, then we'll build a factory in China. He didn't even find out what it was connected with and that China would soon be gone too? Friends, agree, this is complete nonsense, and he's only saying it because the authorities in the Russian Federation do not believe that anything will happen to Siberia in the near future. Because if that were the case, and they decided to just abandon Siberia, they would have evacuated the defense industry. After all, there are unique machines and technologies there, and we would have learned about it first from Cholakyan. Do you remember what Cholakyan himself said about himself? After all, he is also the founder of OSINT, an open-source intelligence foundation. That is, he comes up with a legend, and then pulls convenient facts from the internet to it, everything he can find in the public domain. And he naturally keeps silent about inconvenient or even fundamentally contradictory facts. And why is he doing this? What do you think? Predictably, the archons manipulated his consciousness as well, flattering his ego, suggesting the idea that if he attacked the authorities in the Russian Federation, the right people would help him destroy that country. But in the end, the wrong candidate came to power in the USA. Probably, Cholakyan was really concerned about the climate but thought that one would not interfere with the other, but on the contrary, would help create the necessary public resonance. But did he himself understand who was standing behind him, instilling this idea through a chain of several people? And the Alat Ra managers, did they understand, refusing the chance of life for all of us, exchanging it for some preferences for the movement that seemed important to them? Did they see those who were hiding in the shadows and giving them false hope? After all, they gave it away, but it didn't help. And what the archons wanted from Alat Ra, they, alas, have already achieved thanks to our silence. I will read an excerpt from Anastasia Novak's book. The archons used their old proven scheme. If a movement cannot be destroyed, then it must be headed. They used this method of seizing power over the undesirables, quite often in history, and still use it to this day. As soon as an organization became very popular and well-known among people, the archons immediately focused their forces not just on destroying this organization, but, what is much worse, on replacing its internal ideology by introducing their people into it and destroying the arhats who headed it. That is, outwardly, for ordinary people who are not familiar with the internal affairs of the secret society, the organization remained active, but in its spiritual essence, it was already empty. Playing on its popularity and even sometimes using the names of the arhats they themselves destroyed, the archons were already manipulating the consciousness of people in their own way. By the way, Cholakyan's new appeal, Catastrophic Earthquakes Are Inevitable for Humanity, has just been released, where he openly uses the name of Igor Mohalovich Danilov, accusing Vorkin, anti-cult organizations, and the authorities in the Russian Federation of persecuting our friend. But just yesterday, in order to remove the emphasis from spiritual knowledge and hide it, the Alat Ra managers, on the contrary, asked not to distribute conversations with Igor Mikhailovich anywhere and not to mention his name, arguing that he could be killed because of it. Now the knowledge has been hidden, and now it's okay, it turns out. Isn't this hypocrisy? Of course, in this appeal, Cholakyan says only good things about Igor Mikhailovich. And of course, he does not say that the archons are behind the persecution of our friend and Alat Ra, skillfully diverting attention and dropping it on simple pawns. Let's briefly summarize what happened to the movement with the arrival of Cholakyan. The first is division and impossibility of unification. It is clear that citizens of the Russian Federation are not in the movement anyway due to the law, but most now reject Alat Ra also at the level of the new ideology. The second is power appears. Decisions are made by the ruling elite, who simply send orders from above. Those who disagree are excluded from the movement. The third, a policy has been introduced. Because of this, the authorities in the Russian Federation are now persecuting members of the movement, and citizens have a sharply negative attitude. The fourth, added slogans of the archons, freedom and democracy, which are not actually observed by the participants within the movement but are used in the fight against anti-cultists or dissenters. The fifth, introduction of suspicion and the search for enemies. It is stated that Vorkin's agents are penetrating the movement and those who disagree with the new ideology are accused of working for the enemy. 6 is the creative society is not even mentioned, burying the chance for human survival. The seventh, spiritual knowledge has been removed, while books and channels with conversations with Igor Mikhailovich are being destroyed at the request of copyright holders. 8. The movement received the blessing of the Pope, but refused to spread forums on religions, the Universal Grain Project, which separated the wheat from the chaff and contributed to the spiritual salvation and unification of people. 9 bloggers who only yesterday were guides to the spiritual world have become relayers of animalistic intellect. 10. They ruined the reputation of the entire movement and Igor Mikhailovich specifically, because any person with sense who listens to Cholakyan and starts connecting the dots will come to the same undeniable conclusion I did. That Cholakyan is lying and using manipulative tactics on his audience. The movement is now ruled by lies and hypocrisy, masked by noble deeds, and people can sense it. Those with strong personalities are repelled by this, while only those who are being manipulated by consciousness are drawn, and this means the archons can continue to control them and convince them of anything. It's all very sad, isn't it? Cholakyan creates appeals about the Siberian plume again and again, but consider how this appears to ordinary people in Russia and their government. Russian citizens, generally speaking, can be divided into three groups. The first group, these are patriots and those who have been especially susceptible to Russian propaganda, which, as expected, has reached maximum intensity during the war. They are the majority, and in Cholakyan they see only an American with American flag behind him broadcasting against their government. They are unable to analyze information about real climate threats when it comes from a person perceived as an enemy. Moreover, he's talking about Siberia. These people have believed since childhood that if disaster strikes, it will be in America, and Siberia will become a stronghold for the entire world. Furthermore, they have recently become even more convinced that God is on their side. The second group, people who are more free from the influence of propaganda and, accordingly, have developed logic and a tendency to analyze. They will watch Cholakyan's appeals and laugh at the obvious lies in his attacks on the government, and then they'll look about Alapra online and become completely convinced that something is wrong with the movement. If they try to verify what Cholakyan says about the Siberian plume, they will come across refutations from Russian scientists. Consequently, they also won't believe Cholakyan and will consider him an enemy of Russia and the movement, a plot by globalists. And the third group, a definite minority, consists of those who already had issues with the Russian government, or those susceptible to outside propaganda and easily manipulated through their emotions. These individuals who are most likely to start disseminating Cholakyan's appeals, for which they could easily face legal repercussions. Ultimately, the way Cholakyan presents information regarding the Siberian plume proves to be not only ineffective, but also openly harmful to the movement and its members. But how are Cholakyan's addresses perceived by the Russian government? It's the same image of the enemy, because he openly insults the president and them, accuses them of greed and the future deaths of people, tries to destabilize society during wartime, creates problems, and forces them to defend themselves. At the same time, those in power see that, at least, the attacks on them are not based on real facts, because they are not withdrawing capital from Siberia for that reason. And also, they listen to their own scientists and believe that nothing will happen to Siberia. And tell me, will the government trust Cholakyan? Will they allow him to do anything with Siberia, even if they suddenly realize the threat had reached a critical point? No, because he is the original enemy, and admitting their mistakes is tantamount to relinquishing power. Furthermore, the scientists will hold their position to the bitter end, also afraid to acknowledge their own miscalculations. More likely the government will hope that God will save them and everything will be all right. And truly, because no one will give a 100% probability that the plume will erupt soon, and no one will take responsibility for such a prediction, because other volcanoes could erupt first, thereby relieving the magma pressure. Moreover, there is no similar experience of degassing in global practice, and in case of failure, one could lose a third of the country. And that's according to Cholakyan's conviction, and what's really going on, we don't even know. After all, it is naive to believe that Cholakyan will tell only truth regarding the Siberian plume when we clearly see lies and manipulations in his other videos. And so, consider what happens. Russia is a nuclear country, and you can't just take Siberia away from it for degassing. And by trying to disbalance society, you only increase aggression towards yourself. Therefore, the conclusion that the archons deliberately made this direction a dead end, and at the same time, the participants, absorbed in the confrontation, didn't notice how the direction of the movement changed and those 10 points above appeared. And now, look, I strongly pressed on my consciousness, requiring it to find a solution, and it answered with the following: a new and important player has appeared on the chessboard this year. The citizens of the United States, at the end of the crossroads, made the right choice, demonstrating a desire for peace and a cleansing from gender filth. And this gives humanity a chance. We need to try to reach out to both Trump and ordinary Americans. Trump is non-establishment, reckless, self-confident, patriotic, and most importantly, after the assassination attempt, he believes that God saved him for some special mission. That's why he's doing all sorts of stupid things now, trying to make America great again. Naturally, the Archons are taking advantage of his weaknesses and trying to manipulate him, for instance, by setting him against China, which they're afraid of, throwing obstacles in his path. And the further into the past his presidency goes, the more he will fuss in order to retain power, and the more desperate steps he may take. Musk has already realized that the enemy is too strong for them, and he's slowly backing away. What, if not a declaration about a global climate threat, could distract citizens from Trump's miscalculations and focus attention on how great he is and a savior of the world? Of course, the emphasis shouldn't be on the plume under Siberia, but on all global threats, including the threat from the Yellowstone volcano. After all, U.S. citizens have heard since childhood that it could erupt, so such information won't be rejected by their minds, and if Trump announces this publicly, then Putin won't stay on the sidelines either, because, based on the criticisms he's facing, it seems he isn't adequately under the Archon's control. Trump and Putin could agree, for example, to present the degassing not as saving Siberia, but as saving other countries from dangerous volcanoes. Russians would be proud that their Siberia, the cradle of civilization, is saving the world, and the citizens of the saved countries would be filled with gratitude towards them. People would forget about hostility and start uniting, trying together to overcome the climate. Of course, Cholakyan won't appeal to Trump, because those behind him don't want people to learn about the climate and unite. It's important for them to reduce humanity, so they are stalling and focusing only on one dead-end point. So be it, I'll tell you how to get information about the climate disaster to Trump. You could start with Tucker Carlson, for example. At least he wasn't afraid to tell everyone how a demon attacked him at his country house 2 years ago and made cuts on his skin. After all, Tucker really helped Trump win, and he's a public figure. How much power did it take for the dark ones to try to kill him? An interesting sign, isn't it? There are other people in Trump's administration who aren't completely corrupted. They have children and they really want to live. We need to reach out to them too. However, considering that the Allatra movement is now just a pawn on the chessboard and unfortunately not even a white one anymore, its leaders are unlikely to do all this. And it would probably do more harm anyway, because the movement has already ruined its reputation. However, if we look at what remains positive within the movement, it is undeniably the people themselves, who voluntarily and without pay are trying to help spread the climate agenda. Yes, they haven't realized how skillfully their minds have been manipulated, with all the good intentions extracted and led to a dead end. But precisely because these individuals are not constrained by salaries or formal structures, they have the potential to act independently. So, what do you think? Did you hear the suggestion from my consciousness? However, it's always important to remember that my consciousness, though it perceives the chessboard and the figures upon it, will never say that the same player sits on both sides. Of course, it's important and necessary to expose the evil that specific people are doing, but that won't solve the problem at its root. At best, the lizard will shed its own tail, and then simply grow a new one. You can blame the leader of the anti-cultists, Cholakyan, the Archons, the top of Allatra, corrupt politicians, or government officials for all the troubles. anyone, ignoring the fact that without our direct participation, they are incapable of real action. After all, it is we who create these authorities or enemies. It is we who take up arms and turn brother against brother. It is we who hate those of a different faith. It is we who are indifferent to the suffering of others, to the reality that children, our children, human children, die in agony from hunger and thirst, are trapped under rubble, become orphans. It is we, humanity, who daily purchase bags and useless clutter, without even considering that we are exhausting the resources of our planet, transforming it into a landfill. We have lost the ability to love, to respect the opinions of others, to speak openly about the soul and God. We can only consume and, like zombies, believe in lies that are sweet to our ego or agreeable to our consciousness. We are doing all of this, you understand? We are falsely horrified when we hear what the powerful of this world are doing behind closed doors to our children, but we never admit to ourselves that in their place we would do the same. Of course, the consciousness will protest. I would never, if I had their power and money, I would only do good. I would talk about the climate. But the more significant the power and opportunity for influence, the more pressure the system puts on a person through their own consciousness, the more it amplifies their weaknesses and indulges their inner baseness. To completely change the ideology of Allatra, to shift the direction of the movement from spiritual to material, took only 1 year. And this is despite the fact that its participants worked on themselves and had knowledge. Then what can be said about those who were born in darkness and never knew God's love? And look what's happening with the younger generation. Swearing, alcohol, drugs, debauchery, lack of morals, promotion of easy money and fame, and no spiritual guidance. And, gradually, children are growing up, burdened by the subpersonalities of those who died with weapon in their hands. This can't go on any longer. It's a dead end for all of humanity. We, as humans, in this consumeristic format are simply doomed to die, and the climate. Cerberus is a blessing for our planet because it alone can force us to wake up and finally unite. After all, only in a creative format of society will the desire for personality development, rather than consciousness development, be stimulated in people. You know, before, my consciousness used to say, like, see, if there was 0.5% chance of creating a creative society under Igor Mikhailovich, now that the movement is practically taken over by the archons, there's none at all. And I used to agree with it. But now I look at it all differently. The system calculates our entire life in advance and assigns specific roles. Yes, we have a choice, but only within the framework of the options offered to it. However, when we get out of its power, we become incomprehensible, violating the order of calculating of these percentages. For example, we share spiritual knowledge and tell everyone what is really going on, thereby liberating others and causing it maximum damage. And when there are more such conductors of the spiritual world, we increase the chances of building a creative society. Now working on yourself is not only the path to personal salvation, but also the path to the salvation of all humanity. Well, here we come to the final part of my address, and it's time for everyone to decide. Why are you here? To find out the truth or just to defend your own beliefs? Friend, even if you do not agree with some points, I am sure that inside you feel that there is truth here, for when I say this, a fire burns in me. Yes, your consciousness is indignant, trying to cover up the fear that you will reveal it with other strong emotions. But this negativity simply cannot be experienced by a personality, do you understand? It always comes only from consciousness. And, as long as your heart beats, it is never too late to look Satan in the eyes and simply step over him. Towards a life without self-deception and lies, towards each other, towards God.